Good afternoon, everyone. The Ranter is back to go into yet another rambling diatribe of the news of the day. And I don't know how long I'm going to be on with this one. It's just me expressing into the void my free-floating thoughts of hostility towards our current body politic. Now, the vote a day or so ago concerning changing the senatorial rules on the filibuster in order to facilitate pushing forward the voting rights bill, the John Lewis voting rights bill, was more along the lines of a foregone conclusion, with the Republicans not only successfully blocking the rule change, keeping it that in order for it to pass it has to hit a plus 60 vote threshold to survive a filibuster. But two Democrats, Sinema and Manchin, sided with them on this. Now, on their talking points about this, their siding with this and continuing the filibuster is all on this principle where they don't want to change the senatorial rules for things like this, and that it should be more behoovant on the Democrats to do more compromise with the Republicans in order to make these things pass, while at the same time claiming to be supportive of the voting rights bill, and in a preliminary vote actually did vote for it, knowing that it was a procedural vote that would lead to this, that they know would lead it to be crushed. And, of course, you have the Republicans crowing about this, a successful defense of American democracy, or however they want to put it, in not changing the rules, for the radical left, as Lindsey Graham put it, to get their way and, irrevocably harm our republic in one fashion or another. It is humorous in a really sad way when you hear this type of self-congratulatorial diatribe coming from people like Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell, and how they successfully staved off this attack on the senatorial procedures and preserving the senatorial rules on the filibuster. It's funny because that is what they themselves did multiple times in recent memory, going as far back as ancient time as 2017, when Mitch McConnell was advocating the changing of the filibuster rule because they wanted to help support their president, Donald Trump. So they successfully changed the filibuster rule while they were in the slight power they were in, to allow Supreme Court picks the nominations to be an up or down vote, majority rule. They did it to support the passing of the Bush then Trump era tax cut. That was just an up and down vote. They changed the rule in order to allow the fast track and installation of lower circuit court judges, multiple ones, up and down vote. And to be clear that this is not just a Trump era thing, fairly recently, in the Biden era, in November and December, they also changed the rules yet again. While the Democrats were having a slim majority, they still changed rules to have an up and down vote on the debt ceiling. So this has been done multiple times by the Republicans, and it's one bipartisan issue with the Republicans and Democrats for the debt ceiling. They felt it was okay for the stability of the American democracy, and whatever high slogans they want to throw out there while they throw the American pie in your face, to say it also was prim and proper to do so to raise the debt ceiling, but not for voting rights. Somehow that is that bridge too far. And even though Sinema and Manchin supported voting rights, it was a bridge too far for them to change the rules to allow an up and down vote on voting rights. So, priorities. It's great. Now, when you get down to it in a cynical, pragmatic way, what the Republicans did is expected. It is in the fair play in the political spectrum that is what they were doing. But don't fucking lie to us and talk about you selflessly, save democracy as you know it by making sure you keep the filibuster intact so that voting rights, the John Lewis voting rights bill, wouldn't go through to make it easier for people to vote. I mean, making it reasonably easier for Americans to vote should be one of those fundamental things that helps perpetuate democracy in a democracy electoral republic. You would think both sides of the aisle would want this thing to be done, and for those paying lip service to it, they'll say how noble such ideals are, and yet they still vote the other way, don't they? And again, you can understand the point of view of the Republicans on this. Pragmatically and cynically, you can understand why they wouldn't want voting to be as easy for certain demographics of people as opposed to the demographics of people that vote for them. Why? Because they know with a certain degree of certainty that if everyone who was capable of voting was able to vote, they would lose. They would lose big time. Now, there are caveats to that point. Because for me saying that should mean, well, if that's the case and Democrats have been winning, in majorities in these past elections, then why should it be even close? Why should the Senate be as close it is with that razor thin majority that the Democrats have and will most likely lose in 2022, later this year? Why is that? I mean, we have to dig into the rhetoric of both sides and the messaging of both sides. By all accounts, what Democrats stand for as a platform in base population majorities should be everything that people would want and what people would vote for, to strive for. For things like equality, racial equality, gender equality, equalities amongst the sexual orientation. It should be something that, goes be supportive of voting rights, to make sure everyone has the ability to have the right to vote. To give everybody the basic human respect in the choices that they have and allowing them to have the choices they should have. And the myriad of other things. And on the Republican side of that, the rhetoric is more restrictive. I mean, it's more flowery, and they'll throw out, enough American slogans to try to distract you with the shiny object in their hand, while demonizing, the other side for being socialists or anti-American or any of the other bullshit taglines that they want to, get people to hit the buzzer for them. But when you break it down, they're on the losing end of the argument. However, despite the fact they're on the losing end of the argument, they still manage to win out in the arguments. To get just enough people in the right places to come out for them. Or, at the very least, are given the image that when they come out for themselves. You know, you're going to lose something if you vote over there. They're going to take over whatever you have. They're trying to tap into the fear. Fear and hate. That's why when you get an election cycle, where you do hear about, the scary caravans are just around the horizon. They're about to arrive around election time if you don't stop them by voting these people out or making sure you vote us in. Look no further than the constant barrage that we hear on the right talking about critical race theory. How candidates from senators, congressmen, presidential candidates, I'm sure, governors, will talk about, we'll dedicate our stance to make sure critical race theory is nowhere near the school system for your children to be infected by and indoctrinated by. Okay. Critical race theory is a college-level study normally studied in law school. It does not show up in public schools. Ever. And it is one of those weird things that you hear people going, I hate critical race theory. If it came into this school, it would ruin everything. And then you go ask, okay, what's critical race theory? I don't know. They don't know. You know what critical race theory is? Is a scapegoat. It is the foot in the door to hold the door open to allow people to go, if they're trying to teach critical race theory in school, then maybe we need to look into the libraries and see what they're also having in the books. What? Books about gender equality and positive outlooks on different sexual orientations? We better burn the books for the sake of the children. See, there's always a little and to these things. Critical race theory and, the decency in our libraries, or what these teachers are teaching. I mean, there's stories that you hear in some of these states. Like, I heard a tale about Florida that DeSantis was contemplating making sure teachers had to wear microphones so that people can monitor them to make sure they weren't teaching any critical race theory. And as I said, since critical race theory is not really taught in schools, just in college-level studies and law school, a Republican candidate who wins an election will guarantee that critical race theory will never show up in the schools. That's great, because they're not there in the first place, and they're not going to be there. It is, I liken this a lot to the concept of some candidate that dedicates themselves to making sure Sharia law doesn't show up in a town or community or in a district or a state when there isn't a Muslim 100 miles anywhere near these locations, or enough Muslims in a given geographic area, that would even conduct Sharia law outside of their own homes. But since they're not there, they're not there because I'm here. I'm the reason why it's not there, because I dedicated myself and Jeebus and Christ and all of this to make sure that you won't have to deal with something that you would not deal with anyway, because it's not your faith. But Sharia law is another boogeyman, another thing to scare you with. So we're going to scare you into the voting booths. but not in the vast numbers that they think they're ever going to get. That's why they have to screw with voting laws. They have to screw with voting eligibility to make it a lot harder for people of certain demographics that they think always leans Democratic, because Lord knows, the black community is completely monolithic and only votes one way. Not taking every individual, regardless of where they come from, and give them the case-by-case basic of respect. No, we can't do that, because that takes nuance, and we're too lazy for nuance. And that statement is something I've been thinking about the last few days, where no one wants to take the time to figure out that some people who are considered good can also do bad things. And bad people who do bad things sometimes does do good things. But nuance is just so tiring. It's just, I need a nap just to think of, how our founding fathers were just such great star-spangled people that helped carve and shape the infancy of our colonial existence into a country. And yet we're slaveholders who would sit there with a straight face and write out the Declaration of Independence with the emphasis on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness while holding slaves. Now, in the nuanced conversation, you would take the good and the bad, the pros and the cons of this. You weigh and measure them. Then you consider someone either being good or being bad, without eliminating either. On a grand scheme of things, someone was a good person for their actions that helped perpetuate a people, that gave benefit to other people, that filtered down to the generations. That's great, that's wonderful, but he was also a slave owner. Or he was also a racist bigot. Now, the proper thing to do is to teach both. That, there are good people and there are bad people. Sometimes they interchange and do good or bad things. But you're supposed to be able to weigh the good and the bad to determine this person's legacy in life. There is no question in majority of people's minds of the good or bad of Adolf Hitler, right? What if someone goes, "Oh, what? Adolf Hitler once saved a puppy." Yay! Yeah, that's one good act. But that doesn't counterbalance the bad that the rest of the world knows that he had done, ordered to be done, inspired people to do. And not only inspired people to do back in the 1930s and the 1940s, inspires it to today. From a lot of people who invoke him while propping up their own hate for the other. My pros and cons. Because of his actions, Hitler promoted a sense of nationalism and pride in Germany. Whatever positive that you can glean out of that came for them scapegoating and blaming the other. And not just, obviously, not just the Jews, but the other in terms of other people who that they need to compare themselves to and claim their superiority over in order to make themselves feel better. Pardon-moi. Time in. As I was going on to a rant on nuance and double back on just the concepts of what's going on in our politics. And those people were like shocked and appalled that Sinema and Manchin voted with the Republicans. They really shouldn't be. Although I think the Democratic Party itself should have to have a little conversation with them. You have to realize that both Manchin and Sinema are representing districts and or states that are either majority conservative or utterly conservative. So they have to reflect the views of those who vote for them. Even though they claim to be Democrats, they are as conservative of Democrats as humanly possible in order to maintain their positions as senators of their states. What is annoying to me is that, people don't want to be honest when they do things. For Republicans, they don't want to be honest with the whole idea of, this was such a travesty that the Democrats would try to change the senatorial rules on the filibuster when they themselves did it multiple times. But it's a clear saving of America that we made sure we blocked the voting rights. They won't even mention the voting rights as the reason why they were doing this. I mean, only one Republican actually voted for it? But everyone else did not? So, yeah. And, of course, if you hadn't seen it, Mitch McConnell, afterwards, doing his little presser, made the comment about, with the voting rights thing is unnecessary because African American voters were voting as much as American voters. Those little slips and omissions is always fun. You don't see, like, in that instant of people, like, going, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Because I hate to break it to you, but African Americans are Americans. But be that as it may, the old white turtle, I'm sure that was a perfectly acceptable statement that he made in his mind and the minds of those who were standing behind him. Yeah. So, as it stands, there will be no major progress on anything. While the filibuster is intact, while they use it on things like voting rights, and I'm sure on any other social issue that they choose to demonize, or they'll let go for it for the debt ceiling, and they'll let it go for Republican-supported Supreme Court nominees and lower court judges to be installed, or tax cuts. That's fine. But the cynical pragmatism of this is that we should now just expect that when Republicans are in power, the Democrats should do the same thing. When Democrats in power, the Republicans should do the same thing, regardless of the issue. In this instance, the issue that they were blocking, that they're patting themselves on the back on, clinking champagne glasses over, is making sure voting rights and the eligibility, being able to vote, continues to not be equal, which will allow them to continue to skew, gerrymandering, to make voting stations disappear or require different requirements one place as opposed to another place. Because a certain party knows in their own calculations that they will never have the majority vote without them doing measures like this. without them making sure that it's difficult and frustrating for people to vote. What, they made it actually illegal when people were standing in long lines to vote for anyone to go and offer them a sandwich or a bottle of water while they're in line? And when they come up with this stuff and they think they're so clever, then they go to their church and pray to God how wonderful, how good Christians they are. I don't know. This isn't a long one. This is just me venting into the void, as I tend to do. I'm sure there is more to talk about, and I will get to that at some point. But the ranter rants because the urge to rant is always rising, so I always find something to talk about. I appreciate you all who do sit here and actually listen to me shouting out into the void. And I will talk to you later in another rant in the void. Good evening again. Ranter is back again in the space of a few minutes, because as I was reviewing the video I was doing, it occurred to me that there was some points that I still wanted to get across, and frankly I'm not going to want to wait till the next time I actually feel up to doing this. And one of the points I wanted to make was over the reasons why, despite Democrats being on the right side of a lot of issues, that they can't seem to kick over a healthy majority in the Senate or the Congress, since they're losing seats in the Congress, even though they're at the head too, and why that is. And sometimes we can go through a list of the pros and cons of certain members of the Democratic Party that might turn voters off, and if they hug themselves to one issue or another, then people go, oh, I don't want to touch that because that person's there. Another way is a little more simpler, is the concept of messaging. Democrats in general seem to have a problem with the messaging of their own positions. They don't know how to keep a narrative, and they lose it, and when they lose it, the Republicans will run with it. Now again, Republicans, as we have seen, for the majority point of view, is usually on the wrong sides of these major issues. However, they know how to tap in that narrative and drive it into enough people that it becomes an echo chamber of them screaming about this, screaming about that, drawing attention, which goes, oh, whoa, there must be something there for them to keep going at this over and over again. So, they allow themselves to draw suspicion and worry and fear and hate on the things they're politically opposed to. I mean, once again, critical race theory is an example of that, as I expressed in the previous video. They don't know what it is, but we're being told that this is pretty bad, and so we better oppose it, so we better vote for them because they're going to save us from critical race theory. Democrats, as I've seen recently, at the very least, has a problem of not controlling the narrative, of not banging on the drum like Republicans do. And one of the Republicans too does do to the cynical, pragmatic credit is they can say some shit and not give a shit what you think. It is interesting. They can go out and say all politics, there's some lies that comes out of politics in one form or another, depending upon the various degrees of the point of what they're trying to say in order to garner support or garner hate in one way or the other. That's understandable. When you go out and bold-faced lie, and you know that is a lie, but you do it because it is the party line, and you are trying to run and raise money off of it. You will say the sky is green. People will look and say, no, the sky is blue, but you don't care. Because this is a one-way conversation. They're not interested in your opinion. They're not even interested in you agreeing with them. They're interested in the money that you will go to support them. They're interested in your votes, so they will pander to you, but they're not going to listen to you. And you say that's the same thing on both sides of the aisle. To one degree or another, that's true. But for things like the pandemic, to follow Trump's line from the end of his presidency forward, to build off of in order to pander to the people that support him. So you take that 10 steps across the dance floor to being damn near anti-vax yourself, and to question, the validity and the safety of vaccines, or the people that are promoting it, and go after Fauci, question Fauci upon, where he puts his money, or what he invests in, or what he supports, across the world, or in China, which was one of those funny things where one of these senators were bringing it up, not Rand Paul. Rand Paul and him going back and forth, that's another fucking video in and of itself. But it's funny, this one senator who was trying to get him, and for his financial records, and Fauci says, well, it's public record, you can just look at it. Where do you find it? Just ask. That's the one he called a moron. But the senator that went on the Fox News and just talked about how, some of Fauci's financials were going to the labs in China. And it's like an aha moment. Yeah, but that senator also has money in Chinese firms. So that just makes me want to go, and? But it is that just complete lack of hubris. So when you just say something that is either categorically not true, or it is not the whole truth, but just enough to get people to go, oh, I raised an eyebrow with that, so I better go and, hate this guy. And when you see the cynical, ads of of on the vaccine, or on Fauci, or on critical race theory, then it's like, support us. Support us in our fight against these evils. Because only we can save you from staying alive and having an understanding and quality of all fellow man at a college level in law school. But, again, Republicans have this way of just not giving a shit that is pretty spectacular in when they post this stuff out, because they don't really want to take questions. They want to say this like any good internet troll. They want to say their little shit, throw their little grenade, and then they go run away. They said their business. They're not interested in your opinion. They don't want to hear a rebuttal. They just want to say their shit, walk away. And they do. And like we see in politics, or even we saw going back to 2016, people will react to how people respond. It has been my running theory as to why Trump got so popular and ultimately became the nominee and ultimately became president through the support of the Republicans, is that the Republicans who didn't want Trump at the start, during, and even after, they wanted someone to stand up to Trump. wanted one of these Republican candidates, which there were many, to put him in his place. They wanted to see strength. Even that's not true strength, it's bullshit strength, but they wanted to see strength, and they didn't. They saw the other Republican candidates until they were backed up against the wall hug Donald Trump because they wanted his loud, rabid supporters. So that once he does finally go down, they will know that, oh, this guy was nice to Trump, so we'll just mosey down over there and support him. That's what happened with Ted Cruz, famously enough. And it's what happened to them after the fact. After he became president, and then they continued to hug him because they still wanted the supporters. People generally want to see strength, and they didn't see strength. They saw vacillating. They saw people becoming beholden to him and his fan base. So they parrot the lines and the lies and the bullshit to the degree where they know that it's wrong. But enough people either believe it or they run with it because of the bombastic nature of Donald Trump and how much success that is projected. Whether it's true success or not is almost irrelevant, because it does become reality is perception, and perception is reality, where it no longer matters what facts are, no matter what you can prove, as long as what you can say and you can continue to say and refuse to admit being wrong. There must be something there if he's not admitting that he's wrong, so I'm going to keep supporting him because he's a fighter. Democrats don't have that. I don't know if it's you want to claim that it's like idealism or integrity or any of that, but they're politicians, all of them, both sides. At some point, everyone steps in the bullshit. But Republicans are good with the message and the narrative and how to hold on to that narrative to get people to buy that critical race theory is going to invade your schools and indoctrinate your children. And whatever horrible thing that will come from that. I don't know what. Because frankly, I don't know what they consider to be critical race theory. Because you can imagine that comes down to people going, oh, wait a minute, that history teacher just taught that Virginia colonists brought over black slaves in 1619. They're teaching that slavery was in the United States. That must be critical race theory. No, it's a fact of life of what happened, actually. That is actually our history. But you don't want to teach that because what? That makes people feel sad? Or not feel good about themselves? It reminds me of seeing this video that Candace Owen did for PragerU on how she essentially was making people feel better on the fact that they're descendants of those who held slaves. How she wanted to make the point of slavery was everywhere and everyone was doing slavery and it's no big deal. Technically, it's no big deal somehow. I don't know. And what is the point of that? Everyone who had owned slaves is now dead for at least a century. If anyone is affected by any of this at all, is those people who went from Reconstruction to Jim Crow into the 20th century and still are racist, bigot sons of bitches and teach their children to be, that perpetuate that. You don't want to mention any of that on this video that you're doing? No? Okay. You don't see anybody on the Democratic side doing just be that ramrod that captures the imagination, that do so. People get close. Bernie Sanders got close. But the broken record of income inequality, he got close. He had a popular fan base going on for him. But he also vacillated, and he also kowtowed to the Democratic machine, which they themselves, when they were supporting Bernie, was kind of rebelling against. So when they saw him, fall in line, then they gave up on him. No matter how much of a good man he is, and what he himself went through in his experience during the time when the civil rights movement was a movement and not a reality as it's supposed to be today. And that's the other thing. Another thing that goes in support of Republicans is they are lockstep. With very few exceptions, they are lockstep as a party. They are a hive mind. They are just almost monolithic. You don't want to be lazy and just lump everybody in together into one thing and just generalize the whole group. But they get pretty damn close. And if you're not following the party line, then you are pariah, then you are traitors to them and therefore traitors to America. Just talk to Adam and Liz Cheney about that. And how much they decide from their conscience, in their point of view, in their common sense, how things occurred from January 6th. And for the words that were vomiting out of the mouth of Donald Trump that they themselves could not get behind. Yeah, Adam and Liz Cheney are pariahs, and they're just not good Republicans, and they're not even Republicans, reader. We should just cast them out of the party for having a point of view that does not differ with the hive mind. Yeah, Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, is not Republican enough because they're not supporting the ramblings of Donald Trump or the sycophants that support him and then tote the party line. That is no longer the party of Lincoln, no longer party of Eisenhower, no longer the party of Reagan or Bush, but Trump. So they follow his totem and venerate him and deify him. But they don't do that, so therefore they must be destroyed. They must be cast out. Why are you so needful to prove your loyalty to someone who lost? But Democrats, again, unlike the Republicans, who are lockstep in the majority point of view, are not. Now, I railed on being the cynical and pragmatic point of view of the Republicans and how their actions, especially on the voting bill, make sense from that point of view because they know, on a public's point of view, they're on the wrong side of these policies. But you still have to be pragmatic and understand there's a time and place for idealism to succeed. And unfortunately, the time is not now when you have the slimmest majority in the Senate and that majority doesn't give a shit because of the filibuster rule. The things you want passed, the things you think is time is now because you have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. You don't really. Because of the filibuster rule. And because you are fighting amongst yourselves. And voters see this. And voters look at Democrats and they think they're out of their fucking mind and how they cannot seem to coexist and commingle and be a united front. And in what we saw in the last recent election, especially the gubernatorial one, at least in my state of Virginia, running on a platform of just being against Donald Trump does not succeed in 2021 then. And is not going to succeed if they're going to push this shit in 2022. Because it's not for Democratic voters, I can say with some reasonable certainty, could be wrong, not trying to generalize, but we not only want to hear, yeah, fine, you're against Donald Trump, that's great. Tell us what you're going to do. Give us some hope of what you want to do for us. What values of us are you going to help promote or perpetuate and improve? Don't just be opposed, because that's what they're doing. They're demonizing. They're striking fear of the other, striking fear of alien, horrible concepts like critical race theory and wearing masks and taking vaccines. Tell us what you're going to do for us lately. And unfortunately, Democrats are not quick on the draw in this, and they fall into the patterns of just being anti-Trump, and that's it. And every Republican candidate is just Trump light, or is following the Trump line, or tacking on Trump to them, which is funny to me because I remember years ago when I first became politically aware in the 90s, and I started voting in 96. That I remember seeing all these attack ads against Bill Clinton and how, they would tack on Bill Clinton with Chuck Robb for Chuck Robb's election. It says, I was like, what does Bill Clinton have to do with a senatorial race? Because they wanted to connect the dots that Bill Clinton represents Chuck Robb. Chuck Robb represents Bill Clinton. So whatever local state politics is going to be benefited or be in a detriment due to this man running for office is immaterial because he is just a surrogate for Bill Clinton. That didn't always work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and this is a long-time political thing that has been done over the years. Seeing Democrats, tacking Trump on to Republican candidates, whether it's justifiable or not, because God knows many of these Republican candidates, either are hugging Trump because he's the second coming of something, or they have to because they're fearful they'll get primaried by someone even farther to the right, or someone farther wearing the tinfoil. And so they have to grin and bear it and eat the shit. Democrats have to be more than that. And we don't have too much time left. As I said before, Democrats are on the right side of most of the policies. With some exceptions. If you don't take too far of a field, understand with pragmatism that we can get only certain much done. Can't get everything we want, but keeps that door open for later on when we can. But there are oftentimes they get ahead of their skis. They go too far out. Then they get chopped off at the knees because of it. And that could be, again, part of their messaging problem. That could be the political infighting whether they truly support or they put their backs and support into President Biden or not. If they decide to hug him on some issues and not hug him on other issues, which is perfectly acceptable, because I'm not being silent on the fact that there's a lot of things with Biden I am not supportive of, and I would be shopping for another candidate, especially on the immigration issue, which has been my constant thing since the majority of these videos that I do. I mean, we're in a really weird situation in terms of our country. I have heard a number of people in my personal orbit or online worrying about our democracy in the idealistic point of view. And it's not hard to say that for many years, many people have considered us in our decline, as if the Roman Empire was declining. And maybe it's not the Visigoths at the gate, but you can certainly feel that one side is doing their best to coast us to the bottom. Pandering, placating, fanning the flames of every demonizing hate and fear, catering to the irrational and to the conspiracy, because that's how they feel like not only they can get support from themselves, but shows that they are in support of their dear leader. Even went to the point where the dear leader himself, who wears a broken watch, can still be right on the time at least twice a day, that Trump will go out and he will support vaccines, and he will show that he says, yeah, I got a booster, and you should too. And the very people that he had gotten whipped up into making the pandemic a political issue for himself in his last year in office booed him for saying he's pro-vaccine, for saying he's pro-booster. You made the monster, and you let the monster out on the quiet countryside, and you don't know how to put the monster back. And you see it online, you see in social media, certain people who are not quite politicians, but they're in the political media, shall we say. And so they are playing footsies with the anti-vax. You know, do the way of like questioning the validity of vaccines, questioning why do we have to still wear masks? It's so traumatizing to the children for them to wear masks. And you know, and may not go over the deep end themselves, but they'll like other people who go over the deep end. They'll like their comments, like on Twitter, to give them that support. Continuing to push disinformation and misinformation because it is politically and maybe financially expedient to them and benefit to them. I guess a YouTube producer, Jesse Gender, who does Star Trek videos and is definitely a strong advocate for trans rights, came out with a video concerning some of her personal issues that are being affected by the COVID pandemic. You know, that she has to wait to get procedures done that she's been waiting a long time for, and now had them canceled because of COVID. To her credit, she's not entirely blaming the anti-vax. She's blaming the people that cater to the anti-vax, and I'm with her on that. Because it's not enough that there are people out there who are, running around with their heads on fire on the concept of, I don't want to get vaccinated. I don't want to wear masks. I don't want my children to wear masks. At the same time, these people are flooding into the emergency rooms and hospitals, filling up the hospital beds. And we have to take care of them because we take care of everybody. But at the same time, and not just the example of the YouTube producer Jessie Gender and what she was going into the hospital for. Think of people who have their appendix about to burst. Think of people with cancer that's eating them alive. That they can't get a bed. They can't get seen. Because people who were encouraged to not take the vaccine. To whether they believed it or not in themselves is one thing, but to actively not do it because someone else encouraged them not to for a political point of view. Because I want to get their support, so I'm going to pander them and make them say that, hey, they're right. Or maybe they're right. Or maybe we should just question. And so long as we're questioning and we're not getting the answers, because we're not really interested in getting answers, but as long as we question, then they won't do anything. I'm not going to do anything because I'm still questioning. I'm still wondering. Someone tries to give you the answer, and it's like, I don't believe the answer. Because that's how disinformation works. You throw out the question with no intention of wanting to hear the answer, of getting the answer, of walking away with that answer. You don't want that. Not really. You want the power of the question. Late great George Carlin says it's good to question. You must question everything. And that's true. But George Carlin would accept the answer once he agrees, once he realizes that is the actual answer. He will listen. And either he will say it's bullshit, or he will run with it. Because the difference is, even if he calls bullshit because he listened to what you said, weighed the pros and cons with it, checked out the facts of it, and then said it's either bullshit or not. There are people who were encouraged to wave a hand against any medical advice. Hate on Dr. Fauci to the point of threatening his life and the life of his family. And in reality, when you break that down, when you break down to simplistic terms as to why people are so enraged of Fauci, someone who's dedicated decades and decades and decades in public service in the medical community for the United States and the world, especially during AIDS research. Didn't quite hear anybody getting political about him then. No. It was because he contradicted the bullshit that came out of Donald Trump's mouth. And none of them will forgive him for that. Regardless of the fact that he can maybe be right or wrong, they're not even considering listening and determining for themselves. They have a question, they don't want any answers, and they'll listen to somebody who agrees with their question and says, you're right, you should question, and in fact, don't even bother with the question, just don't believe it. Don't believe anything that is said. Except us, believe us, because, we're just like you. Multi-millionaires and billionaires living in gated communities that pander to you. how many strong Democrats can come out and be that, brutally honest about this, without using, the grand speech and noble ideals, which is in political speech of everybody. We always want to throw the slogans out there. We want to quote people. Abraham Lincoln once said, or Dr. Martin Luther King once said. To add a little bit of weight to whatever they're saying, when they should be strengthening their own word with their words, with their actions, with their experience. Of course you can quote these people. Yes. And but quoting Martin Luther King Jr. or quoting John Lewis, or giving out details as to what happened to these people, these good people, during the time of civil rights, didn't change people's feelings when almost everyone, save one Republican, voted against the voting bill. And 2 Democrats voted that way too. For the final time, and I'll cut this off, and this will be the last time I do this for tonight, because this is like the second video, and I'm like still in my rant mode. Democrats got a short window left until you get to the midterms. Your slim majority is meaningless. All that gives you is the ability to control the calendar of what comes up. That's great. Republicans don't care of their popularity in the grand scheme of things. They don't care if they'll deny everything, because even if it hurts people to deny it, they will do so for political power. And then they will blame you, or blame Biden, or socialists, or radical teachers, or librarians, or at some point immigrants again, or people in bathrooms. I don't know. But they will control the narrative because you have not learned to do that. Final time, I'll say this. The Democrats, a majority of the policies are on the right side. But for whatever reason, cannot grasp that right side into the hammer that it should be, to smash the disinformation, the misinformation that the other side perpetuates, to wrestle away the narrative and take it back, to try to be honest about it, and to be able to say no when the conspiracy theorists come out. There is no great example of the difference between the Republican Party, I'd say, 2008, and the Republican Party of 2022 than John McCain. When that fateful, famous moment when the woman stepped up, sat down next to John McCain, and he's doing the interview in the town hall, and he's talking to her, and she says, I can't trust that Obama because he's an Arab. And John McCain politely, courteously shut her down. He said he was a good man, a good family man, and he had differences of political opinion, and that's why he's running for president. No Republican today would ever have the guts that John McCain had to do in that moment. And when he did it, that didn't take guts. That was just knowing right and wrong for him. And I'm sure a lot of Republicans at the time probably had still within them that integrity to not cater or pander to the paranoia, to fearmonger, to perpetuate hate or ignorance because of the cynical, pragmatic ideal and understanding that you pander to people to get their support, you buy their bullshit, and they will buy yours in return. As long as you reasonably make them feel like you're agreeing with them, no matter what the issue is, no matter how batshit crazy it can be, you're supporting it. You're perpetuating it for them to make them feel better about themselves and encouraging them. And thus we have people in hospitals, overrunning the hospitals, unvaccinated, and other people who have life-altering, life-risking illnesses or procedures that need to be done have to wait in the waiting room and suffer or be turned away and die. Does that sound melodramatic? Well, sometimes flat out honesty is fucking melodramatic. Alright. I am done now. Maybe. No, I'm done now. I'm not going to do another one. Not tonight, at least. Ranter rants, rising, yeah, all that. Thank you for your patience, the one or two of you that are actually going to watch this. Have a good night.